I love the Dragon Quest games, and I think they're super great.
Come on, 15.
Dragon Quest games have been essentially the same since the 80s, so they're not. It's not like new. They're not new. They haven't made anything spectacularly great that's new in definitely 20 years. No, I don't know.
Ah, I shouldn't turn on the stream. Mom's coming back with food like right now. All right, super extra short, short time stream.
It's like Final Fantasy VII, 22 years ago. I mean, I love all the Final Fantasy games, but was Final Fantasy VII the last really important one? I think so. I think all of the ones since then have been, they've all suffered comparisons to Final Fantasy VII. Are we recording? Oh, hey, that's good. I can include that. Because that was like a genuine, I guess I should start the video now. How does my hair look?
Freaking love Tim Rogers.
Hello, and welcome back to Video Games. I'm Tim Rogers. You are watching the Kotaku.com review of 1994. The year. I specified the year because otherwise you would assume that someone made a game called 1994. That is the sort of name an independent developer would give a video. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Is the first sentence of Charles Dickens's 1859 novel, A Tale of Two Cities, which we had to read in my English literature class 135 years later in 1994. As Charles Dickens said of London and Paris of 1775, 84 years later in 1859, as I read 135 years later in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1994, so I say 25 years later in 2019 of video games and my life in 1994. 1994 was the best of times to play video games, and the worst of times to be me. Personally, I won't mince words. In 1994, I was a sweatpants-wearing, Frankenstein-haired, morbidly obese, myopic bullying victim who spent almost as much time feeling sorry for myself as I spent thinking about video games. Likewise, video games spent about as much time feeling sorry for themselves as they spent thinking about video games. As I waited with increasing impatience for my own puberty, video games were right in the middle of theirs. 3 and 4 years previous, the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis had arrived. 1 year after 1994, we would have the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation. 2 years later, we would have Super Mario 64. 1 year before the hardware madness of 1995 began its yet unceasing explosion, we had 1994, a year of revisionism, not of innovation, a year of refinement, not of reinvention, a year of technical mastery, not of technological advancement. 1994 was a year for game design. In 1996, we would have Super Mario 64. In 1994, we had Donkey Kong Country. In 1996, we would have Quake. In 1994, we had Doom 2. Actually, this quote about Doom 2 from Wikipedia just about says everything that I'm going to use the remainder of the running time of this video to say in far more flowery prose. Doom 2 was not dramatically different from its predecessor. There were no major technological developments, graphical improvements, or substantial gameplay changes. Instead, the development team took advantage of advances in computer hardware.
Oh man, that's why he's making this video, huh? Because we're pretty much there.
Their game engine by making much larger,
we're doing that again.
Intricate levels. For video games, 1994 certainly contained all the awkwardness of a puberty. In 1994, they made a Pac-Man 2, and it was a point-and-click adventure game for consoles. In 1994, 2 completely different video games called Vortex came out. In 1994, Nintendo followed up Star Fox with Stunt Race FX. In 1994, Konami called the second game in the Rocket Knight Adventures series, Sparkster, as though someone's mom somewhere knew the name of that possum. In 1994, Mortal Kombat brought bloody violence to Nintendo consoles, only to squander this milestone with unimaginative fatalities such as Johnny Cage just grabbing his opponent's torso and joylessly ripping him off. In 1994, a few baby boomers somewhere became aware of Street Fighter II, and so Shaq learned Shaq Fu. Michael Jordan, meanwhile, took aim on the other famous Jumpman and starred in a platform action game of his own, Chaos in the Windy City. 1 year before 1994, we had a Super Mario Bros. The movie. In 1994, Beavis and Butthead starred in a point-and-click adventure-like game on the Sega Genesis. In 1994, Electronic Arts literally made a video game about the perhaps fabricated fad of gripping a stranger's car bumper while wearing rollerblades. Yet, unlike my own erstwhile puberty, 1994 saw video games blossom in hundreds of gorgeous ways. For every soul-lacking, drummed-up mascot platformer like Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City, we had one cute platformer like Umihara Kawase, starring a little girl with a pink backpack and a fishing rod. For every trashy Mortal Kombat wannabe, we had two genre-stretching Japanese action adventures. To wit, two top-down Japanese action-adventure games about firefighters came out in 1994. Today, we have a new Call of Duty every year. In 1994, if you said shooting game, someone might have thought you were talking about an over-the-shoulder two-player co-op shooting gallery game about a cowboy, a cowgirl, and various evil anime steampunk robots. As the year 2019 draws to a close, I find myself looking back at video games. Many great games came out this year, sure, though also many video game developers, publishers, critics, and historians tweeted many tweets this year about such and such game's 25th anniversary. Anyone who, like me, owns the habit of paying too much attention to literally everything, much to the detriment of their own comfort, should be coming to the end of this year thinking less about their top 10 best games of the year, and more about, wow, there sure were a lot of 25th anniversaries this year. So today, I would like to present to you what I have carefully calculated to be the 25 best games released in 1994. My ranking process required me to walk a fine line between sentimentality and science. 9 times out of 10, if you asked me to write a ranked list of historically important items, I would prefer to go with my personal preferential instinct over performing any kind of mathematical calculation regarding historical significance. Like, when a publication does a list of the 100 best games of all time and they put, like, Tetris at the top, that's more boring to me than putting, for example, Doom at the top. Tetris looks like a choice a computer made. Doom looks like a choice a person made. However, as I composed this list, I found it interesting that a lot of my favorite games from 1994 turned out to be historically significant. So, despite being a year of incremental improvements rather than blustery, thunderous hardware explosion, it turns out that 1994 was an uber year for great video games. It's almost as though the end of a console generation is better than the beginning of a console generation. It's almost as though we make better games when we're not thinking about making bigger games. It's almost as though incremental refinements are true innovation. Either that, or I'm taking a really long time to say video games actually have not changed that much. At any rate, let's get started with number 25, Motor Tune Grand Prix. Before Cuphead, before Forza, before Gran Turismo, before Mario Kart 64, Motor Tune Grand Prix did not try to be all or even any of those. MotorTune Grand Prix came out 2 weeks after the launch of the PlayStation in Japan, and nobody yelling about it on the other side of the Pacific was yelling loudly enough for me to hear. Die-hard game fans
really gonna go get that
hyperventilated about it for a bit, though by then I'd learned to ignore most of die-hard game fans' hyperventilations. At any rate, none of us could have possibly known back then that the developers of MotorTune Grand Prix would go on to change driving games forever with Gran Turismo in 1998. After Gran Turismo, MotorTune Grand Prix became a favorite in Did You Know circles. Its power as a trivia item squatted in the back of my brain long enough for me to acquire a copy for less than $1 a couple of years later in Japan. I put it on one day on a whim, thinking I'd get my less than $1's worth. It turns out it completely owns everything that its developers would need to crank out Gran Turismo sleeps in MotorTune Grand Prix's prehistorically simple action game race flow. It turns out that the zeitgeist of 1994 and the upcoming hardware madness of 1995 perfectly encapsulates the entirety of an opportunity window in which video game developers very well could have replaced mascot platformers with mascot racing games. MotorTune Grand Prix's curious mixture of cartoons, cars, tunes, and flat polygons lend it a look worthy of thousands of retweets in GIF form by circa 2019 indie video game developers. Number 24. Urban Strike. Urban Strike is not as good as Jungle Strike, though you know what? I didn't care. In 1994, I loved helicopters about as much as I love helicopters in 2019, and Urban Strike was a game about helicopters. I had already squeezed every last drop of hot milk from the stone of Jungle Strike, so I hunkered down and slaked my thirst on a long weekend with a rented copy of Urban Strike. One could say that Urban Strike thus had a textural sensation not unlike the DLC of today. That would be a stretch, though this whole video might as well be a yoga class, so let's allow it. Urban Strike taught me that a game could disappoint me on some critical instinctual level, yet still stand worthy of my wolfing down of every grisly morsel. Today, we can look back at the Strike series as pioneers of two aspects. First, their gargantuan level maps and freeform mission objective punctuation laid the groundwork for Grand Theft Auto, which planted the flag of the modern open-world game design disease. Second, it had helicopters. Not enough games today have helicopters. Helicopters are better than cars. Playing a helicopter in third person is better than running around with a rifle in first person. In 1994, I played all the way through 2 games about helicopters, Urban Strike and Choplifter 3. Well, 3 if you count Wing War. In 2019, I got nothing. Number 23, Donkey Kong Country. Late in 1994, Nintendo published this little side-scrolling platform game, marking the historical occasion of their allowing a Western developer access to their precious intellectual property. It is great to love Donkey Kong Country for nostalgia reasons, though I hope that even its most supportive fans can agree that it offered little in the way of innovation for the platforming genre. Yet I make the decision to place it here on my list instead of a much better platforming game like Umihara Kawase, because Donkey Kong Country also represented a colossally massive marketing event. You could not flip open a phone book thick issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly in 1994 without your eyeballs tripping over a paragraph about how they used the same computers to model Donkey Kong that they used to make the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. Mainstream Toys R Us video games were suddenly high-tech in a buzzwordy, local TV newsy way that PC games had confidently never bothered to be. Number 22, Monster World. Ooh. I confess I did not know about this game until many years after 1994. When I finally played it, it opened a back door in my brain. Monster World 4 enlightened me to reasons and machinations behind many of the PlayStation-era games that I had loved. While other developers chased trends and refined their own classics, the makers of Monster World 4 polished half-baked, discarded relics. At the time I first played it, Monster World 4 reminded me of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, Legacy of the Wizard, Faxanadu, Battle for Olympus, and other underloved NES games. It is a heavier, harder, more brutal action role-playing game than most people must have wanted in its day, where other games in soon-to-come later years would adopt Zelda-like breeziness and accessibility. Monster World 4 eschewed the very notion of player-friendliness in favor of heavy action techniques possessing density that could drown a Castlevania protagonist. To any modernly trained sensibility, its dedication to easygoing cartoon storytelling might seem at odds with its brutal dungeon designs. Though if we look at it through the lens of 1994, we might sympathize with its developers. There really was a chance something this angry yet beautiful could have taken off. In 2019 and forever, it's a masterpiece. Back in 1994, my favorite American video game magazines didn't even blip it as an import-only curiosity. Coming in at number 21, Blackthorn. Blackthorn is out of this world, the video game. It proved to me in 1994 that level design was, in fact, an art form. Blackthorn distilled the cinematic aspirations of Out of This World and flashbacks into a distinctly video game experience. 1 year earlier, Blackthorn's team had made Lost Vikings an undeniable classic. You probably wouldn't have any puzzle platformers were it not for the Lost Vikings. That's not the worst. 25 years later, Blackthorn's developers are Blizzard, and they made Overwatch, World of Warcraft, and Diablo. Also in 1994, Eric Chahi released Heart of the Alien, a sequel to his classic Out of This World. Though 25 years later, visionaries like Fumito Ueda and Hideo Kojima will cite Out of This World as one of their biggest influences. The level design scientist in me sees a lot more to love about Blackthorn's sticky action mechanics. You can hide in the shadows, you can fire your shotgun behind your back. In the same year that they released Blackthorn for Super Nintendo and DOS, Blizzard also released Warcraft, Orcs and Humans for DOS. Both Blackthorn and Warcraft were incremental refinements of existing video game genres, possessing a scarce few examples each. Maybe a fool would not have been able to notice a pattern looking at these two games, though anyone compelled to compare the microscopic
After what seemed like forever, he finally reached his destination.
would have immediately declared that Blizzard was going places. Number 20. Sonic. It's Knuckles. Sonic and Knuckles is the best Sonic the Hedgehog game. For those keeping score, Sonic Mania is the second best Sonic the Hedgehog.
He just tried everyone.
Third best Sonic the Hedgehog game. Anyone who says they like the original Sonic the Hedgehog game the most is a liar. Anyone who says the best Sonic the Hedgehog is Sonic 3 and Knuckles is a narc. Sonic and Knuckles is the best Sonic the Hedgehog game because it has the best level design.
Nothing here.
For a video game series that situates almost its entire charm around the very
What's that
concept
round
of
thing
children
up there?
moving forward at a higher speed than most
must be where
human
King
eyes
Kai
can
is.
comfortably read.
Hell
The
yeah!
visible geometry is always going to be
Yep,
the
no
trickiest
mistake
part
about
to
it.
get right.
There's even a
Sonic and
house.
Knuckles was the fourth
I thought I already got here.
So
Oh, I know I'm on my second.
place. Where is he?
I mean, my restart, but I thought with the restart I got here. Ah, that's right.
Knuckles was the fourth mainline Sonic the Hedgehog game and the last two
Who are
in
you?
for a long time. By the time Sega decided
Know what
to
you call a
again
cow and
dedicate
don't
themselves
eat
readily
meat?
to the Sonic the Hedgehog business, the game industry was trending toward all 3D.
Maybe you
So,
Alright,
Sonic and
let's see a
Knuckles
different
perhaps
because you find
encapsulates the
it
spirit of
weird.
1994 as the same as any of the other games on this list ever did.
Yes, I
Sonic and
know.
Knuckles was the fourth
Wait.
game in the series,
Well,
and the second
if you
game
wait
in that series released in the same calendar year. It was the last 2D entry in a series that later went 3D.
have a nice trip. See you next fall.
Connect other Sonic the Hedgehog games to add the character Knuckles to them as though by magic. This form of glorious, unique, one-of-a-kind, materialized DLC also expresses the spirit of 1994-ish iterationism. The lock-on cartridge, as they call it, perhaps represents the ultimate example of employment of extreme thoughtful care in implementing a minor addition, which sort of breaks the game. And if you're still keeping score, yes, I love playing Sonic and Knuckles as Sonic. All I'll say about Knuckles right now is he's more fun to play than Donkey Kong Country. Number 19.
Well, why didn't you say so?
USA. At the
I'm
time
going
I
to need to
first saw
test
a
it, though.
linked up Daytona USA.
I need to see what I'm dealing with here.
That was an arcade chain
Great.
social event.
Yeah.
You
I
got it.
was the sort of amateur these teenagers who hated their hometown by default. After I saw and played
Who is this
USA,
guy?
well, I can't say that I fell in love with
Very
it.
well.
Not 7
I
years
will
later, I
train
would leave my hometown and never return outside of a few
This guy
scattered
just might
holidays.
actually have what it
However,
takes.
Daytona did bless me with one.
He might be able to handle the coyote
All
town.
my
Maybe
antisocial
even my
disdain
greatest
for
technique.
Indianapolis, Indiana, and its storied tradition.
Yeah, I don't know if I saw that cutscene. I probably restarted around here.
I could not help looking at Daytona USA and suddenly deciding that NASCAR was pretty cool. In school, I knew of many loud meatheads who liked NASCAR one way. Daytona USA proved to me that some other people, 10,000 miles distant from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, had discovered another method for expressing appreciation for NASCAR. The confrontation of the bold confidence of Daytona USA's presentation convinced me to set shame aside for a second and assess the scope of NASCAR's game design as a sport. To this day, I love NASCAR. I own many richly vintage NASCAR t-shirts.
Mean,
This never really
green,
happened at Daytona.
teaching machine.
With its bizarre music, its luxurious typography, that Sonic the Hedgehog cameo, and the opportunity to prove
Sonic the Hedgehog
better.
Wonder what I'm gonna do today. Maybe I can hockey can be pretty dangerous.
Here at number 18, Beyond Oasis, or The Story of Thor. The only two things I love as much as Zelda games are 2D Zelda games and weird Sega-published 2D Zelda likes. The only thing I love as much as weird Sega-published 2D Zelda likes is Horse and Laundry. Weird Sega-published 2D Zelda likes Magic Knight Raider, Linkle Liver Story, Landstalker, Light Crusader, Shining Wisdom, Crusader of Seti, and Beyond Oasis all turned my 1990s brain into a forest fire of possibilities. Top-down
Game is
sword
that?
action
Yeah, I'm gonna play the game on this review for sure.
felt like the future. Just when I thought Zelda Link's Awakening showed me the full depth of the genre, we had Landstalker, with its lush cartoon animation, crispy music, and sharp, brawler-inspired Sony launched PlayStation in December of 1994. Beyond Oasis did not come out in the West until 1995, which is when I played it. I'm going to go ahead and include it in my list anyway, because it offers me a perfect opportunity to nonchalantly segue into
Looks like the
Oasis.
pathetic, whiny
Number
kid who couldn't
17,
get his own apples is
Crusader
long
of
gone.
Seti, released in Japan as Ragnarseti, released in Europe.
The name's Piccolo.
Critique constructors and quoted Western video game
Not the same Piccolo.
I'm gonna bet your dad told you about it.
unanimously
Which is
described Crusader of
Yeah,
Seti as a
I remember him saying something.
All right, let's get down to
Maybe
brass
that's fair
tacks, shall we?
when you look at it. Though in action, it showed me a vast, smooth, and freaky alternate universe Zelda with something different at the guts of its design. Crusader of Seti is a game so underrated, I have even underrated it myself. I rented and blasted through it in a weekend back during the summer of 1994. My biggest takeaway then was that I liked Landstalker better for its bigger scale, broader adventure, and
Ooh,
nasty
that sounds like dinner.
However,
I'm gonna
at some
end
point
illustrate.
after playing Crusader of Seti, I felt a sudden hunger for it. This hunger might have had something to do with meeting Carl Knighton,
that's
the director of
There you go.
Landstalker and
You can finally start controlling some of your energy. You won't be so happy for long. I'm going to teach you true combat. Now get ready to spar.